The train screeched to a halt at Dry Creek Station, its whistle slicing the dusty air like a cry of warning. As passengers hurried down from the cars, families with bundles, cowboys with saddlebags, merchants with their wares, Clara Whitfield remained on the bench, her hands folded protectively across her swollen belly. She was 42, too old by most folks' standards to be carrying a child. She had endured the sidelong stares all the way from St. Louis, whispers about her wrinkling face, the puffiness of her ankles, the awkward way she shifted her weight when the baby pressed against her ribs. But Clara had held on to one thing that silenced her doubts, the promise of a man waiting for her at this very station. John Penrose had written letters so sweet Clara had nearly wept when she read them. He promised marriage, security, and love, a chance at family when she thought her years had long passed. He had arranged her ticket and told her to wait here at the platform. He would arrive, and together they would start a new life. The train hissed, groaned, and finally pulled away. The last of the passengers drifted off into town, boots crunching in the dust. Clara looked down the road, her heart pounding with every figure that passed. None were John Penrose. Her chest tightened. She waited, hour after hour, as shadows stretched across the ground. Her hope grew thin. The voices of strangers began to cut at her like barbs. "Reckon her man changed his mind," a cowboy drawled as he spat tobacco to the side. "Too old to be having a babe? Foolish woman," a lady murmured to her friend as they passed. Clara kept her head down, tears burning her eyes. She whispered to her unborn child, "It's all right, little one. Mama will figure it out." But the truth pressed heavy. She had no money for a room, no kin in these parts, no husband waiting. She was utterly alone. The station master shuffled over, concern etched on his weathered face. "Evening, ma'am. Last train's gone till Tuesday. You got somewhere to stay?" Clara shook her head, unable to form words. He sighed, tipped his hat, and left her there. The prairie wind howled through the station's beams, rattling the old sign. The world seemed to be closing in, a vast land that had no place for her. Just as despair wrapped its cold fingers around her heart, she heard the slow, deliberate tread of boots on the platform. A tall figure cast a shadow across her lap. She looked up into storm-gray eyes, hard, weary, yet searching. He leaned close, voice low and steady. "You're mine now." Clara's breath caught in her throat. She blinked up at the man, unsure if she had heard right. The words, "You're mine now," seemed less like a threat and more like a vow. Still, her pulse quickened with fear. The stranger was broad-shouldered, sunburnt, and clearly a man accustomed to work. His face was rough-hewn, shadowed by stubble, but there was something in his eyes, something that softened when they lingered on her trembling hands over her belly. She gathered what courage she could. I don't know you, sir." "No," he replied evenly. "But you will. Ain't right for you to be sitting here left like that." The words pierced her. She turned away, heat rising in her cheeks. Left like that? Yes, that was exactly what had happened. Behind them, whispers stirred again. The saloon doors creaked open, spilling yellow lamplight onto the street. A pair of men leaned against the rail, watching her with cruel amusement. Look at her. Old. Crow, heavy with child. No wonder he didn't show. Reckon she's waiting for another fool to take pity. Their laughter rang out, cold and sharp. Clara bit her lip until it bled. She wanted to vanish. Every word confirmed what she feared, that she was a burden, a mistake, a woman too far gone in years to deserve love or family. The stranger straightened, his jaw tightening. He turned toward the men, and his voice carried like steel. "Enough." The laughter died. The men shifted uncomfortably, muttering curses, then slunk back into the saloon. Clara looked up at him, startled. No man had defended her in years. "You don't know me," she said softly. Don't need to. I know right from wrong, and I know you need a place to rest your head tonight." Her pride urged her to refuse, but the ache in her back, the heaviness in her belly, and the sting of the townsfolk's words pressed her toward acceptance. "You mean to help me?" she asked. He nodded. "Name's Eli Harper. I got a ranch just outside town. Ain't much, but it's shelter. You'll be safe there." Clara hesitated, torn between fear and the unbearable truth. She had nowhere else to go. The whispers of the townsfolk still lingered, echoing in her ears. Alone, she was a target for their judgment and cruelty. With Eli, she might find a measure of dignity, at least for the night. She drew a shaky breath. "All right." His eyes softened, and, for the first time that day, Clara felt a flicker of something unexpected. Hope. The night air was sharp as Eli helped Clara to her feet. His hand was steady, his grip firm but not unkind. She leaned on him reluctantly, her pride fighting the weakness in her body. Her legs trembled from the long wait at the station, but she refused to show just how frail she felt. Eli didn't speak as he guided her to his horse, a sturdy bay gelding tied to the post. He untied the reins, then glanced at her belly, his jaw tightening as if weighing whether the ride would harm her. "You'll ride with me," he said finally. "Safer that way." Clara bristled. She hadn't been held by a man in years, and the thought of being pressed against a stranger's chest made her heart pound. Yet she could see no other choice. With difficulty, she allowed him to help her up. She winced as the saddle dug into her side, but once seated, Eli swung up behind, her, one arm firm around her waist to keep her steady. The horse stepped into the dark prairie, hooves striking rhythm against the earth. The town faded behind them, its lamplight shrinking to a dot. Ahead stretched only open land, the kind that made a woman feel small and forgotten. Clara fought the urge to cry. Instead, she whispered, "Why are you doing this?" Eli was silent. A moment, the night wind tugging at his hat. At last he answered, voice low, "Because I've seen too many folks left behind. My ma, she was left once. No woman should have to bear that." Clara swallowed hard, her throat tight. "But you don't know me. I might be nothing but trouble." His grip didn't loosen. "Then I'll take the trouble too." She turned, her head slightly enough to glimpse his profile in the pale wash of moonlight. His face was carved by hardship, lined with years of work and grief, but not cruelty. Still, his words unsettled her. "You're mine now." What did he mean? Shelter? Pity? Or something else entirely? The baby shifted, kicking against her ribs. She gasped softly, and without hesitation Eli steadied her. His hand was warm, solid, unshaken by her weakness. They rode on in silence. In that silence, Clara realized something. The fear she'd felt when he first approached was ebbing. This man did not look at her with scorn or pity, only with a quiet resolve. For the first time since stepping off the train, she felt as though perhaps she was not entirely forsaken. When the ranch finally came into view, lonely against the rolling hills, lights glowing faintly in the windows, Clara let out a breath. She hadn't realized she was holding. The ranch was simple but sturdy, built of weathered wood and stone. A single lantern glowed in the window, casting golden light against the darkness. Eli helped Clara down carefully, his arm steadying her until her feet touched the packed earth. "You'll stay here tonight," he said, leading her toward the porch. "Tomorrow we'll see what needs doing." Clara hesitated. "I don't want to be a burden." He stopped and turned, his gray eyes sharp. "A burden is someone who quits. You're still fightin'? Carrying that child? That ain't no burden. It's courage." The words nearly undid her. She blinked hard, fighting tears. She wasn't used to being spoken to with such respect. Inside, the house was sparse but warm. A fire crackled in the hearth. The scent of wood smoke filled the air. Eli gestured to a chair. "Sit. You look about ready to fall over." Clara lowered herself carefully, her back aching with relief. She folded her hands in her lap, unsure what to say. Eli busied himself, pouring water from a jug into a cup. He set it before her. "Drink." She sipped gratefully, her dry throat easing. Finally, she asked the question gnawing at her. "Why did you say that? At the station. You're mine now." He didn't flinch. Because it was true. Her heart jolted. "True? But we've only just met. Surely you don't mean—" "I mean," he interrupted firmly, "that I'll see to you and the child. You were abandoned, left to fend for yourself when you shouldn't have been. That don't sit right with me. From now on, you'll have shelter here. Food, protection." Clara stared at him, stunned. No man had ever offered her such a thing without asking something in return. "Why?" she whispered. Eli's gaze flickered, shadowed with something unspoken. "Because I couldn't save my wife." The words hit like a stone in her chest. His voice cracked with the weight of it, though he quickly covered the emotion. He turned away, busying himself with stoking the fire. Clara watched him, piecing it together. A man hardened by loss, carrying ghosts in his silence. Taking her in wasn't just about helping her, it was about redeeming himself. "I don't want pity," she said softly. He turned back, eyes steady. "And I ain't offering pity. I'm offering a chance." A chance? The word lingered in the air like a fragile hope. Clara lowered her gaze, her hands unconsciously stroking her belly. A chance for her child, perhaps a chance for herself. She didn't answer, not yet. But something inside her shifted, ever so slightly, toward trust. Morning came quietly, the sun bleeding over the horizon in hues of gold and rose. Clara stood on Eli's porch, gazing out across the land. The prairie stretched endlessly, rolling hills dotted with sagebrush and the occasional cluster of cattle, grazing in the distance. It was beautiful, but it also felt vast and unforgiving, like an ocean that could swallow her whole. She pressed a hand to her belly. The child stirred gently, as though reminding her she was not alone. That thought gave her a shred of comfort. Eli emerged from the barn, his stride steady, his shoulders squared with the posture of a man who carried weight no one else could see. He led the horse out, saddled and ready. "You'll need some supplies. From town," he said. "Food, cloth for the babe. Doctor ought to know you're here too." Clara stiffened. The thought of returning to town, where whispers and stares awaited her, filled her with dread. "I don't," she faltered. "I don't want to go back there." Eli studied her silently, then nodded once. "Then we'll ride elsewhere. There's another town further north. Less likely anyone knows you." She blinked at him, startled by his consideration. Few men would have cared about her pride. He extended a hand. "Come, the ride's long, but I'll see you safe." Clara hesitated, then took his hand. His grip was strong, grounding her. He helped her mount, then swung up behind her as he had the night before. They rode out together, leaving the ranch behind. The land opened wide, sky stretching so vast it seemed to press down on them. Grass whispered in the wind, and distant hawks circled overhead. Clara clung to the saddle horn, her heart pounding with every jolt of the horse's stride. But each time she wavered, Eli steadied her with an arm across her back. The silence between them stretched, broken only by the creak of leather and the horse's breathing. At last, Clara asked softly, "Why do you live so far out, alone?" His jaw tightened. Some things are easier to bear in silence. She studied his profile, the sharp set of his features. She thought of the grief he had hinted at, the wife he had lost. She wanted to ask more, but feared reopening wounds he'd rather keep buried. Instead, she said, "Silence can be heavy, too. For a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Acknowledgement, maybe even agreement. But he didn't answer. The hours stretched long. By the time they reached a narrow stream to water the horse, Clara's back ached and her legs trembled. Eli dismounted first, then carefully lifted her down. His hands lingered only long enough to steady her, never longer, never taking advantage. "You holding up?" he asked. She nodded weakly. "I'll manage." "Not just manage," he said, meeting her gaze. "You'll make it. I promise you that." In that moment, as the wind rustled the grass and the horse drank deeply from the stream, Clara felt a strange stirring, hope mixed with fear. She was riding into the unknown, but for the first time, the unknown didn't feel like certain ruin. That night, back at the ranch, Clara settled into the spare room Eli had hastily prepared. The bed was simple but clean, the quilt patched but warm. She lay awake, listening to the crackle of the fire in the hearth and the restless shifting of the wind against the shutters. But it wasn't the storm outside that kept her from sleep. It was the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, pacing across the wooden floor of the room beyond. Eli. She rose quietly, careful not to strain herself, and peered through the narrow crack of the door. In the dim firelight, she saw him standing. By the window, his shoulders tense, his hand gripping a small locket that gleamed when the light caught it. He spoke softly, almost like a prayer. "I tried, Mary. God knows I tried. I weren't quick enough, weren't strong enough." Clara's heart tightened. His wife. The grief was raw, even now, carved into his very being. Eli pressed the locket to his lips, then shut it with a snap, and shoved it into his pocket. He dragged a hand down his face, his body trembling ever so slightly, then resumed his pacing. Clara withdrew quietly, returning to her bed. She lay staring at the ceiling, her mind turning. She understood now why. His gaze held such sorrow, why he had taken her in with such resolve. He had failed his wife, lost her to childbirth, and now he was determined not to fail again. Not with Clara, not with her unborn child. But was that mercy? Or was it a burden too heavy for him to bear? The days that followed revealed more of his haunted nature. Eli worked tirelessly, mending fences, tending cattle, chopping wood, always pushing himself to exhaustion. Yet at night, Clara heard him pacing again, murmuring apologies into the darkness as though the ghosts of his past refused to leave him be. Clara watched him, torn between gratitude and worry. He had given her shelter, dignity, even a glimmer of hope. But his pain was so deep, so consuming, she feared it might swallow them both. One evening, as she stitched cloth for the baby, Eli entered, wiping sweat from his brow. His gaze lingered on her belly, then lifted to meet her eyes. "You remind me of what I lost," he said quietly. The words cut, though not with cruelty. She saw in them honesty, even vulnerability. Clara set down her needle. "And do I also remind you of what you still might gain?" For the first time, his face softened. A long silence stretched between them. Then, with a roughness born of truth, he admitted, "Maybe you do." That night, Clara lay awake again, but this time her thoughts were not of loneliness. They were of a man haunted by grief and a woman abandoned by the world. Two broken souls, perhaps, who might yet find strength in each other. The nights on Eli Harper's ranch were long and heavy with silence. Clara often lay awake, staring at the faint flicker of moonlight on the ceiling, her hand resting on the swell of her belly. Sleep rarely came. The child's movements were frequent now, as though reminding her time was drawing close. But that wasn't the only reason her nights were restless. It was Eli. She would hear his boots on the wooden floor, steady steps that never seemed to rest. Sometimes he muttered under, his breath too quiet for her to catch the words. Other times his voice rose, soft, broken, as though he were speaking to someone unseen. One night she rose from her bed, unable to bear the sound of his torment any longer. Wrapping her shawl tight, she padded softly into the main room. Eli stood before the hearth, his face lit by firelight, his shadow stretching long and jagged against the wall. His eyes were fixed on the flames, but his lips moved, whispering words that pierced her heart. Mary. I tried. I swear I tried. I ain't meant to hold on to happiness, am I? Always slips away. His voice cracked on the last word. He bowed his head, gripping the mantel with both hands, his broad shoulders trembling under the weight of grief he couldn't shake. Clara felt her throat tighten. She should turn back, let him grieve in peace. But something inside her refused to retreat. You're not alone, Eli, she said softly. He stiffened, whipping around to face her. For a moment, his eyes were wild, haunted. Then recognition softened them. He dragged a hand through his hair, shame flickering in his expression. You shouldn't be out of bed, he muttered gruffly. She stepped closer. Neither should you. Silence stretched between them, broken only by the crackling fire. Clara reached for courage she didn't know she had. You think you failed her? Maybe you did, but you're not failing me. You took me in when no one else would. Eli's jaw clenched. He looked away, his voice rough. I couldn't stand seeing another woman left helpless. I couldn't. His words cut off, strangled by the weight of memory. Clara's heart ached. She saw then that his kindness wasn't pity, nor duty alone. It was survival, his way of trying to mend the wound in his soul. I'm not her, Clara whispered, but I need you, and maybe you need me too. For a long time, Eli said nothing. His gray eyes met hers, and for the briefest moment, something, raw and unguarded, passed between them. Something like hope, though neither dared name it. When he finally turned back to the fire, his voice was steadier. Get some rest, Clara. You'll need your strength. But that night, as she lay in her bed, Clara no longer felt the same crushing loneliness. His whispers to the dead had been heard by the living, and somehow she felt they had brought her closer to him. The storm arrived without warning. By dusk, dark clouds had swallowed the horizon, rolling in heavy and fast. The wind howled through the cracks of the ranch house, rattling shutters and shaking loose boards. Rain slashed against the windows, thunder rumbling like cannon fire. Clara sat by the hearth, knitting cloth for the baby's swaddling, when a sharp pain seized her belly. She gasped, the needles clattering to the floor. At first, she told herself, it was nothing, just another false pain as she'd had before. But when the next wave came, sharper, deeper, undeniable, fear gripped her. Eli, she called, her voice trembling. He burst through the doorway, rain dripping from his hat and coat. His eyes widened when he saw her doubled over, clutching. Her belly. It's too soon, she whispered, her face pale. The baby. Oh, God. Eli was at her side in an instant, steadying her trembling form. His heart pounded as memories of another stormy night clawed their way back. The night he'd lost Mary. He had sworn he'd never go through it again. Yet here it was, staring him in the face. Breathe, Clara, he ordered, his voice firm, despite the terror gnawing at him. You hear me? You breathe. Lightning split the sky, and thunder shook the ground as he carried her to the bedroom. He laid her on the bed, sweat already dampening his brow. His hands shook as he fetched towels, water, anything he thought might help. Clara clutched his arm, her nails digging into his skin. Don't leave me, she gasped, his chest clenched. I won't. Not ever. The hours dragged, each contraction tearing through her with brutal force. Eli stayed by her side, holding her hand, whispering words of encouragement he hardly believed himself capable of. You're strong, Clara. Stronger than anyone I've known. You can do this. Her screams filled the house, mingling with the roar of the storm. Sweat beaded on her forehead, her face pale with exhaustion. Eli wiped her brow with a damp cloth, his own hands trembling. He thought of Mary, of her pale face, her stillness after the struggle. Fear gripped him like a vice. But then, a sound cut through the chaos. A cry, thin, sharp, alive. Clara collapsed back against the pillows, tears streaming down her cheeks. Eli held the tiny, squirming infant in his hands, his chest heaving. The child's cry was the sweetest sound he had ever heard. "It's a girl," he whispered, voice breaking. "A strong, little girl." He wrapped the babe in a cloth and placed her gently in Clara's arms. She cradled the child to her breast, her face glowing with exhausted joy. Eli sat at the edge of the bed, his head bowed, tears burning his eyes. For the first time in years, he felt the crushing weight of guilt begin to lift. Mary was gone, but Clara and this child were here, alive. The storm outside raged on, but inside that small ranch house, a new life had begun. When the storm finally passed, the world outside the ranch house seemed washed clean. The clouds broke apart in pale streaks, and the first weak light of dawn spilled across the land. The air smelled of wet earth and sage. Inside, Clara lay propped. Up in bed, her hair damp with sweat but her face glowing with a quiet joy. In her arms rested the child, a tiny girl with a shock of dark hair and lungs that had already proven their strength the night before. Clara rocked her gently, humming a lullaby from her childhood, her heart swelling with love she thought she might never know. Eli sat nearby, elbows braced on his knees, his gray eyes fixed on the mother and child as though afraid they might vanish, if he looked away. His hands were raw from gripping towels, his muscles sore from the long night, but his spirit felt lighter than it had in years. When Clara glanced at him, she saw something new in his face. Not just relief, not just exhaustion, but wonder. "You stayed," she whispered softly. His jaw tightened. "I told you I would." Her lips curved into a faint smile. "And you saved us." The words struck deep. Eli looked away, the memory of Mary still lingering like a ghost. But for the first time, the guilt didn't suffocate him. Instead, he felt redeemed. He had faced the storm again, and this time, life had prevailed. The baby stirred, fussing lightly. Clara hushed her, brushing her tiny cheek with trembling fingers. "She's strong, like her father will be." Eli blinked, startled. Her father? Clara met his gaze, unflinching. Whether by blood or by choice, every child deserves a father. You were here. You didn't run. For a long time, Eli said nothing. His throat worked, emotion clogging his voice. At last, he nodded once, slow but sure. "Then she's mine. Both of you are." The words settled over Clara like a blanket, warm and certain. After so many years of being overlooked, abandoned, dismissed as too old or too weak, she felt seen. Chosen. The sun crested the hills outside, spilling gold across the ranch. The storm had given way to a new dawn, and with it, a fragile but powerful beginning. Weeks passed, and the ranch began to feel alive in ways it hadn't in years. The cries of the baby filled the rooms, her laughter echoing off the wooden walls, as the days grew longer. Clara, though weary from motherhood, moved with a strength she hadn't known she still possessed. Eli worked the land by day, but each evening he returned to the house with a light in his eyes that Clara had never seen before. He held the baby with surprising gentleness, rocking her with hands more accustomed to rope and reins. Sometimes, when Clara watched him cradle the child, her heart ached with something she couldn't quite name. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the horizon in fire, the three of them sat on the porch. The baby slept peacefully in Clara's arms. Eli leaned against the post, his hat tilted back, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "You remember what I said to you that night at the station?" he asked suddenly. Clara's cheeks warmed. "I remember." "I meant it then," he continued, his voice steady. "But I mean it different now. Not 'cause I pitied you, not 'cause of what I lost, but because somewhere along the way, you became mine, truly mine, and I reckon I've become yours too." Clara's throat tightened. She had carried shame, fear, and loneliness for so long that the idea of belonging felt almost foreign. Yet as she looked at him, at the man who had stood by her through pain and storm, she knew it was true. "You're not claiming me like property, are you, Eli?" she asked softly, though her eyes already held the answer. He shook his head, his gaze unwavering. "No, Clara. I'm claiming you like a partner, like a woman who deserves to be chosen, and I'm asking if you'll claim me back." Her heart swelled, tears glistening in her eyes. She shifted the sleeping child gently, then reached out her free hand. Eli took it, his calloused palm warm against hers. "You're mine now," she whispered, echoing the words he had spoken that night, but with a tenderness that made them whole. Eli's lips curved into the first true smile she had ever seen from him. He leaned close, pressing his forehead to hers, and in that simple gesture, the ghosts of their pasts seemed to fade. The prairie wind swept over them, carrying the scent of fresh grass and new beginnings. In the quiet of that evening, a promise was sealed, not born of desperation, but of love reclaimed from loss. The woman once abandoned at the station, too old and pregnant in the world's cruel eyes, had found her place. And the man who thought his heart had died, with his wife had discovered it could beat again. Together, they faced the vast Wild West not as broken souls, but as a family,